Hey folks, and welcome. It's Dr. Evans again with another strategy short. These are just brief videos I put together that review and comment on our best of the best instructional strategies. This is kind of our never-ending search for the no doubt about it, talk to the hand, top strategies that our best teachers use each and every day in the classroom to support our children and their families. So what we want out of this now, right, is that we're all learning and growing together, that we push our thinking a little bit, that we challenge our assumptions, and that through this work, we celebrate and honor the efforts of our great teachers across our profession. So let's jump right into today's video topic, which is how do I make good use of assessments and assessment data in my classroom? So that's a great topic for us to discuss, and we'll jump right in. Now, before we jump into today's topic, which is assessment, I'd like to start here with this overview slide that kind of gives you a sense of where assessment might typically fit in a lesson design. So what you're looking at here are 12 key steps that are typically in place when a teacher is leading a student to mastery of content. These are supported by both research and observation of our best teachers in practice. The last thing I want to say about this slide is that while the order typically stays the same, generally, teachers will have different entry points and exit points depending on their style. So a teacher may start with explicit instruction in a lesson, which is fine, or they may start with something more hands-on, exploratory, and then get to explicit instruction a step or two later. So the entry points and exit points may be different depending on the classroom you're observing. That being said, if there's any of these topics that you don't know a lot about or you'd like to learn more about, I will make a video on each of these 12. So check those out on my YouTube channel, and we'll continue our dialogue on the next slide about today's topic, which is student assessment. So today's topic of assessment leads to 2 or 3 considerations I put for you together on this slide, and just some things I'd ask you to monitor in your classroom to make assessment more effective. Under our considerations today, number 1 is assessing each child, each student. So I like to think of it as each and not all, because if you were designing an assessment for every student who's going to take the exact same assessment, although that can be effective, sometimes it leads to a teacher making a decision about where the whole class is, and we never get around to where this individual student is versus this individual student. So retraining our thinking from whole class assessment to shorter, quicker, more formative individual checks for understanding, which is consideration number 2. Don't lose sight of the fact of the power of 1 question or 3 questions just to check where students are, or a skill check, right? Can they write the paragraph well using active verbs or whatever you're teaching? We don't need to write a 5-paragraph essay when we can determine students' ability when they're writing 3 or 4 sentences, because that may be sufficient to determine their knowledge of whatever it is you're assessing. And the third thing I keep in mind is a term you may not know, and that's the powerful use of parallel assessment. And what I would encourage you to do about that is to think of it this way. Students take an assessment, and let's say they don't do so well. Let's say an individual student. Well, then a few days later, a couple weeks later, they take the same assessment, could be literally the same assessment, or a very similar parallel assessment. And let's see whether a couple more weeks of learning, practicing, has improved their skills. So I like the idea of similar assessments over time that lead ultimately to student mastery. So if you're unfamiliar with that topic, we'll probably talk more about those parallel assessments in future videos, but a very important skill that our best teachers use to move students to mastery. As you consider monitoring assessment in your classroom, 1 is student effort. Because at the end of the day, if students aren't taking it seriously, there's not good testing conditions, then you're going to get false negatives and false positives in your data. So monitoring their efforts is very, very important, making sure they're taking it seriously and they value the information that's coming from the assessments. The second thing to consider is never forget that you can stop and do assessment in the moment. Planned assessment is pretty much what we've been talking about today, but you can also do in the moment checks for understanding, and there's lots of ways to do that. If you build that into your repertoire, students will move to mastery faster. And never forget, I brought this up a couple times, student celebrations and praise, very specific praise about what students are doing well. Using that student's name and what they've mastered goes a long way to student intrinsic motivation. So don't lose sight of the power of student praise. With that being said, we're going to jump over to a couple closing thoughts on this important topic of student assessment. Now, a couple of things to ponder when you get back to your school and your classroom or you're talking with your colleagues on this topic of assessment. Some things I'd ask you to think about. One is there a common assessment format in your school across a grade level or a subject area? I think that allows for teachers to collaborate on assessment and data analysis, and allows for students, of course, to become familiar with similar processes across the school, and that's a good thing. Number two is, are there common practices for students to relearn content, such as tutoring, and then to retest, right? So testing isn't an end game. I've done, poorly potentially on a test. I didn't know the content. I did not master the skill, but I have an opportunity to go relearn somehow, right, after school or in tutoring or through an enrichment center. And then I get to retest. And then potentially my new test grade, assuming it's for a grade, replaces the old test grade. And now I'm viewing assessment as something that's driving my path as a student to proficiency. Which leads us to the last thing, and that is, how do you best in your school connect grades to assessment results? Certainly you can have assessment that is not graded. That's certainly fine. But if you're going to connect assessment results to grades that on a trajectory to student mastery, then the thing to think about is, if I did do poorly and my grade was damaged, can I repair that grade as I've repaired my own learning through retesting, which I mentioned previously? So some things to think about that might improve your practice when you get back to school. Now, I like to close these strategy short videos with a kind of a summative commentary on the topic of the day, which is assessment. And here's what I offer for you. Assessment must be designed with the individual child in mind. The true benefit of quality assessment is the degree by which it measures each child's mastery of grade level content and skills in a manner that helps both the teacher and the student learn more, and when the student gains in confidence and improves their self-worth. If our assessment is not leading to these outcomes, then we probably have some work to do. And a closing quote for us to reflect on today. As a longtime educator, I have come to realize that I have known no success nor happiness in my career that isn't directly tied to the happiness and success of children. Now, if I say that definition aloud, I hope it drives your work as an educator to continue to improve your best practice to improve the lives of our children and the families who we serve. I say all that to say that I thank you for being here today, that we appreciate the work you're doing in our schools, and that I hope you join me next time for one of our strategy shorts. Thanks and have a good day.